The Denver Broncos may not be done adding big name players to the roster. We're going to talk about some free agents that could make sense for this team to look at before 2024 training camp on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in Broncos Country to another episode of Locked On Broncos. My name is Sayre Bedinger, co-host of the Locked On Broncos podcast here, as well as the site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com, where I've been covering the Broncos since 2013. And look, Broncos Country, training camp is on the horizon, which means we've got some time to think about this roster and look over. Hey, we're playing armchair GM. We might as well think of some ideas of how this team can get better. On yesterday's episode of Locked On Broncos, we talked about the biggest strengths, weaknesses, and question marks. Go back and listen to that episode if you haven't already. And we're going to talk about some names that could make sense to add to this team based on that list. Can't wait to dive into that, but want to say thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. And for you everydayers out there, you know that you can find this podcast free and available everywhere that you listen to podcasts, as well as you could jump over to YouTube, hit subscribe on YouTube over there at Locked On Broncos, and follow along with the show and watch it with us. And today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. The Broncos, we talked about this. They maybe one of their biggest roster strengths right now as we approach about a month away from training camp here. The wide receiver position is very good for this team. And it just so happens that some of the best free agents available are also wide receivers. And there's been a few names that have come up. There's been a few names of players that, the longer they sit out there, the more you kind of wonder, man, should the Broncos consider kicking the tires here? One name that consistently comes up is Michael Thomas. Now, you see a lot of Broncos fans bring up the name of wide receiver Michael Thomas for a big reason. Obviously, he played and starred for the New Orleans Saints while Sean Payton was still the head coach there, kind of on the back end of Sean Payton's time as head coach. I don't know that there's any real need for the Broncos to go after a guy like Michael Thomas, though. You've already got Courtland Sutton. You've got Tim Patrick on the roster. You drafted Devon Bailey, another big body guy. I would guess that a player like Michael Thomas, a veteran big body player who is probably looking for an expansive role for wherever he signs, I would say that he would be more likely if the Broncos suffer some kind of injury at the wide receiver position this offseason. I don't necessarily know that you want to necessarily bring him in for a look at training camp, so to speak. He's somebody that I think you would factor him in to your plans if you bring him in. But another name that does interest me a little bit, and I want you to hear me out on this, is Hunter Renfrow, the former Raiders Pro Bowl receiver who also has a lot of experience returning punts. And Hunter Renfrow is an interesting player to me for a variety of reasons. I think he really got the short straw when it comes to the way that Josh McDaniels has historically utilized slot receivers, right? And Josh McDaniels, fired by the Raiders, did a horrible job there, of course, as many in Broncos country expected would happen. He was a Pro Bowl player back in 2021. His third NFL season, had over 1,000 receiving yards, over 100 catches, 9 total touchdowns, and was really effective. Caught over 80% of his targets that season. Not only that, but Renfrow has been tremendous over the course of his career when it comes to returning punts. In fact, in 2020, averaged 11.5 yards per punt return, averaged 9.8 yards per punt return in 2021. So you see a history here of productivity when it comes to the punt return game. Here's my pitch for why the Broncos should sign Hunter Renfrow. Number one, I think he could raise the floor once again of your playmaker positions offensively. But number two, I feel like if you want to continue to utilize Marvin Mims in the kickoff return game, it makes a lot of sense for the Broncos to go ahead and bring in somebody like Hunter Renfrow to return punts. Now, is there literally nobody else on the Broncos roster that could return punts? No, they have guys that could go back there and return punts. The thing is that Renfrow is really good at it. He's really experienced in that regard. And so I like the idea of the Broncos keeping Marvin Mims in the kickoff return game, because we've seen NFL head coaches have said throughout the offseason, there's an expectation that teams could be returning upwards of 100 kickoffs this season. If that's the case, I feel like that is a play that you're going to want Marvin Mims out there for. He was an all-pro return specialist last year. Now, maybe the Broncos want to keep Marvin on punt return as well. That's fine. But if they don't, if they want to limit the amount of times that he's taking potential big hits like that, maybe there's a chance that somebody like Hunter Renfrow could make sense. And along a similar vein, what about somebody like Jakeem Grant, who's been a tremendous return specialist in the NFL, even with the league kind of, the rules of the NFL in recent years have obviously been very much not in favor of the return specialist. You want to know something crazy about Jakeem Grant? He made 2 All-Pro teams, second team All-Pro in 2020 and a second team All-Pro in 2021, not because of his abilities as a wide receiver, not even because of his abilities as an offensive weapon. I mean, we're talking about a guy that has never even had 400 yards from scrimmage. He made the All-Pro teams because of his ability to return kicks and punts. Jakeem Grant in 7 NFL seasons has three punt return touchdowns with the Miami Dolphins, another one with the Chicago Bears. So 4 total punt return touchdowns and 2 career kickoff return touchdowns. Now, that's something that I would say would be worth the potential of looking at over the course of training camp, right? And I think that with the Broncos, you're talking about a situation here where you've got Marvin Mims. You've obviously got you've got guys like Jalen Virgil out there and cornerback Tremont Smith. Those players could all potentially be stellar return specialists for you. But if Jakeem Grant, who has struggled to stay healthy, if he is still anywhere near as effective as he once was in terms of the kickoff return game, this is a no-brainer to kind of look at over the course of training camp and the preseason. It would be low risk, potentially high reward, and I think an option that a lot of Broncos country could get on board with. And certainly you would allocate that extra roster spot for him if he was able to win a job. I mean, you would want to keep 6, maybe 7 receivers in the case of adding a guy like this, but the kickoff return game is going to be so important this year that I just don't know if you can sacrifice the quality there. And so I would love to see the Broncos go after somebody like Jakeem Grant for the kickoff return game, or Hunter Renfrow for the punt return game. And look, Hunter could come in and play for your offense too. He could be a weapon for you out of the slot. So kind of an interesting potential there, even at one of the Broncos' deepest positions, maybe their weakest position offensively, tight end. There's just not much out there, Broncos fans. I mean, if you're looking for free agent tight ends right now, it's pretty thin. Even the best option might be somebody like Jimmy Graham, right? Who's a veteran who, I mean, he's just kind of he's going to go out there in red zone situations and hopefully provide you with another secondary, 3rd, 4th, 5th target in the passing game. He's not going to be out there starting for you. And I don't think the Broncos would want that either. So if you want depth at the tight end position, or if you're looking to make a change there, the waiver wire might be better off, because Jimmy Graham is probably the best option right now in the free agent tight end market. But there are some starting caliber players, both offensively and defensively. Not talking about special teams. We're talking about guys who could come in and probably start for the Broncos right now on either side of the ball, still available in free agency. We're going to talk about maybe a guy who could start even at the center position for this Denver Broncos team coming up next on today's episode, Locked on Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by Game Time. And you know what? I've got a lot of great memories going to MLB games during the summer. Got to see the late, great Roy Halladay pitch one time at Dodger Stadium. Gotten to go to countless games at Coors Field in Denver. Got to see my Chicago Cubs play during their World Series run at Wrigley Field. And with Game Time, you can make those kind of memories as well. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. And prices on the Game Time app, they actually go down the closer you get to first pitch. So with killer last minute deals, all in prices, and my favorite, a view from your seat before you even actually sit down at the venue, plus their lowest price guarantee, Game Time is going to take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Pick the specific games, matchups, or events that you would love to attend and go ahead and check it out. Customize your spot. Look at where you're going to sit before you buy the tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. The Denver Broncos have an unresolved starting center position as of right now. And you know what? There might just be a free agent out there who could fill that need. We're going to tell you exactly who that is, maybe even a couple of guys that could be options there if the Broncos aren't satisfied with their young players after OTAs. We're going to talk about that coming up next on this episode of Locked On Broncos. But I need to say thank you to every single one of you out there that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. And for those of you that do tune in every day, mile high salute to you. We appreciate you so much for making us part of your day, however you choose to do so. If it's that you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, free and available on all platforms, thank you. If you jump over to YouTube and subscribe over there as well and watch the show, we can't tell you enough how much we appreciate you. And you know what? If you're already subscribed on YouTube, you might as well check out Locked On Sports Today. It's a free sports streaming service curated by the local content experts here at the Locked On Podcast Network. And you're going to get the best news, analysis, content coverage, and more from people who are experts on every individual team and league that you want to see, streaming for free 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Sports Network, your team every day. There could be a starting center available right now in free agency for the Denver Broncos. And we talked about throughout the offseason, it's been an underrated talking point. But after the departure of Lloyd Cushenberry III, who went and signed with the Tennessee Titans on a really nice contract, a big money deal, Cushenberry parlayed his breakout year in 2023 into a nice contract there. The Broncos might not be out of luck, right? Because they believe in Alex Forsyth, a 2023 7th-round pick. They've talked about how they believe in 2022 5th-round pick Luke Wattenberg. And they've even kind of raised the floor a little bit with somebody named Sam Mustipher, who came in. He started some games for the Ravens. He started a little bit for the Chicago Bears. He's played in the NFL. There's still players in free agency that could, on paper at the very least, be upgrades at this position. I want to start off by talking about Connor Williams. Connor Williams was a starter for the Miami Dolphins the past few years. And before that, he was a 2nd-round pick of the Dallas Cowboys. Not only has he started at center, but he started at the guard position, made the switch to center when he got over to the Miami Dolphins, and has really transformed his career because of it. The only thing that prevented him from getting a big money deal in free agency was an injury in week 11 last year that's got him on the mend. But his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, has said that he should be ready by the start of training camp. He's already been talking to teams. He wants to play center going forward. And I just can't help but wonder how many situations are out there right now, like the Denver Broncos, where there's a clear potential to start going into training camp at the center position. I mean, there are probably other teams, no doubt. The Broncos certainly aren't the only team that has a need at center or could use an upgrade at center. But man, you can't help but think that if you're Connor Williams, you might be kind of pounding on Sean Payton's door or calling him up, having Drew Rosenhaus call up Sean Payton or the Broncos and say, hey, you guys could use an upgrade at center. This guy can help you. I feel like this is maybe the free agent signing that would make the most sense for the Denver Broncos before training camp, but it makes even more sense for Connor Williams. And the reason for that is because he could start in Denver. He would be an upgrade in Denver. He's got two guards surrounding him in Ben Powers and Quinn Miners, who are maybe the best guard duo in the entire league. So that makes his job easier. Not only that, if his job is made easier, if he's set up in a position to really have success in a place like Denver, you know what that does? If he signs a prove it deal with the Broncos, he could parlay that into a big money contract in 2025, and he's still a young player. So to me, if I'm thinking about it from the Broncos perspective, makes a lot of sense, right? Because you don't have to throw Alex Forsythe out there. You don't have to throw Luke Wattenberg out there. You need to be sure that one of those two guys is going to be a high quality starting center for you if you're going to pass on players like Connor Williams, who could be available for, a really reduced price. As we've seen, the center market has been all over the map, but typically pretty team friendly. So to me, somebody who's coming off injury, somebody who hasn't spent the entire offseason program with a team, and somebody who's looking for an opportunity to play right away at a specific position. He's not sitting here saying, yeah, I'll play guard or center wherever I go next. That would open up his possibilities. Saying I only want to play center, well, that puts the Broncos kind of front and center in terms of the potential teams that could look at him. So I like that idea a lot. I love the idea of Connor Williams coming in now, not at the expense of a homegrown guy. You want to see if Forsythe or Wattenberg can be that guy. Great, let them be that guy. But if you're hesitant at all, let Connor Williams come in and at least put his name in the hat for that job. So I like that idea for the Broncos. Another name on the offensive line that is still available right now is former Denver Broncos draft pick Connor McGovern, he's been with the New York Jets the last handful of years. He finished out his rookie contract in Denver and then went and spent the next handful of years with New York. They brought him back last year on a reduced deal to be their backup center, which it was interesting to me. Kind of felt like he would get some starting offers elsewhere in the league, but that didn't materialize. Now he's still looking for work, and maybe the Broncos could be a fit. I mean, if you talk about positional versatility, he's got it. He could start for you at center. He could start for you at guard. He could be a nice swing option behind your starters at those positions. And again, these two guys that I'm talking about here, Connor Williams and Connor McGovern, they could probably be available for a relative bargain. Basically, I think until teams start suffering injuries, right? When teams get out there on the field, if injuries start happening, the price is going to go up. So for the team's perspective, from the Broncos' perspective, now may be the best possible time to kind of get out there and start making moves like this, start making contract offers and getting these guys in the building, or at least getting them their playbooks, getting them ready. Maybe if you sign a center, you want to have him go out and into these July workouts and start getting work with your quarterbacks. I don't mind that option at all. And I think the Broncos would benefit greatly from having somebody, especially Connor Williams, who was playing at a very high level before his injury at the center position for the Miami Dolphins. So it's all about whether or not you can pass a physical. It's all about whether or not you can come in and contribute right away, because the Broncos aren't just going to throw, $4 or $5 million out at somebody who's not going to be able to play. That's just not the case. So you want to see the guy healthy. You want to see him be able to be out there on the field and hit the ground running, because you don't necessarily have the benefit of time at this point. OTAs are done. Mandatory minicamp is done. You've got to be able to hit the ground running. And so a veteran like Williams could come in and definitely play that role for the Broncos. But maybe the most clear options for starters or potential starters are on the defensive side of the ball in free agency, where there's former All-Pros still available out. There's a former defensive MVP still available in free agency on the defensive side of the ball. There are still free agents on defense that could help this Denver Broncos team. We're going to break down a couple of those guys and why the Broncos might want to consider signing them up next on today's episode, Locked on Broncos. Could the Denver Broncos look to upgrade their defense in free agency before training camp? I think so. You know what? There's some names out there that are intriguing and enticing and would, kind of have you check in your bank account to see how much cap space do we have here. The Broncos might look to do some wheeling and dealing before training camp. And I'm going to break that down on the defensive side of the ball here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. But want to say once again, thank you to every single one of you out there that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. Every single day, Broncos Country, you know that you can lock in to Locked On Broncos all offseason because we're going to have news, content, coverage, and more for you all offseason long, even in the dog days of the offseason. Training camp previews are coming up. Roster questions are coming up. And you know what? We got some roster questions right now. Defensively, the Denver Broncos are, I guess you could say, unfinished. I guess you could say a little bit in the realm of sort of, I don't know, what do you make of the defensive personnel right now in Denver? Because some of the biggest question marks that all of you chimed in on for this team, I mean, safety, cornerback, off-ball linebacker, it feels like the fan base is coming around to the Broncos being pretty strong on the defensive front and kind of liking that edge group with the young guys that they have out there, the group of four, at least in terms of, I mean, you've got Baron Browning, you've got Jonathan Cooper, you've got Nick Bonito. Now Jonah Ellis is coming in. Going to be very interesting to see how the Broncos factored Dondre Tillman, the signing that they just had out of the UFL, how they factor him into the equation as well. But let's talk about some defensive free agents that are available and could be intriguing in the right situation and for the right price. Starting with defensive end / pass rusher Carl Lawson. Carl Lawson is a guy that, he was a big money contract player after a couple of his first few seasons in the NFL. I mean, the guy was kind of off the charts a little bit. He had 107 quarterback hits in his first 5 NFL seasons. Now, injuries have plagued his, the first handful of years that he's had in the NFL. His first 5 seasons span 7 years. So it's really tough to say what you're going to get out of him. And he didn't have any production last year. But you know what? I mean, a guy who borderline averaged 22, 21 quarterback hits a season for his first 5 NFL campaigns. I mean, that's kind of crazy production. And he's not doing it necessarily playing 800 or 1,000 snaps. I mean, this is a guy who's effective in the pass rush department with even limited snaps. And so if he's healthy, Carl Lawson is an interesting name to add because you know what? You can never have too many pass rushers in today's NFL. But maybe the most intriguing areas that you could address right now in free agency come at linebacker and in the secondary. Of course, you got to throw out the name Justin Simmons until he's signed. You know what? We're keeping hope alive. But Broncos Country, I wouldn't bank anything on that. I certainly wouldn't go out. I see that Fanatics has mistakenly printed a bunch of Justin Simmons jerseys, and you can go on there and you can buy the brand new Broncos jersey with Justin Simmons' name and number on it. And it's on sale. It's, less than $70, something like that. So if you really want to see Justin Simmons in the new uniforms, maybe that's your ticket to doing it. But he still remains unsigned, which is fascinating to me. We'll see how long that lingers. And other than that, though, the linebacker position, let's start there. I mentioned earlier that there's all-pro players still available, or guys who have been all-pro players still available in free agency. Shaq Leonard, the former Indianapolis Colts linebacker who was cut in the middle of last year. Everybody was like very confused by that. What's going on there? Why is he being cut? The Philadelphia Eagles scooped him up and he ended the season there with Philadelphia. But to me, this is a guy that if you really believe that Cody Barton is one of your best special teams players and you want to have him focusing there as opposed to starting on defense and playing a core 4 special teams role, I think this is a ticket to doing that. And I would love to see Jonas Griffith get an opportunity as well. But we know that Jonas was initially acquired to play special teams as well. And he's going to be able to utilize his size and speed to be a weapon on special teams. But you want to get these guys in competition at linebacker. And the Broncos took a risk a couple of years ago, or, recent history. They brought in Joe Schobert, a guy who had been a Pro Bowl player in the past. That didn't work out. So what did they do? They cut him. And I think if you bring in a player with a low risk, high reward situation, because keep in mind, after June 1st, veteran contracts that are signed, they're not guaranteed around the NFL. That's why a lot of teams wait until after June 1 because it affects the compensatory draft formula. Veteran contracts are non-guaranteed. There's a lot of factors that go into that. If you sign somebody like Shaq Leonard to a reasonable one-year deal, that would be a great move for the Denver Broncos because you would be filling arguably the team's biggest defensive need right now, getting a veteran player who could come in and start next to Alex Singleton, allowing Cody Barton and Jonas Griffith to play a core 4 role on special teams, where we know in the kickoff game this year, it is going to be crucial for you to have quality players on special teams. That can't be overstated. And so if you want those guys to focus there, maybe bring in someone like Shaq Leonard, or maybe bring in someone like Quan Alexander, who has been a very good player over the course of his NFL career. He's kind of been a journeyman at the linebacker position, former LSU player who actually finished out when Sean Payton finished out his final 2 years in New Orleans. Quan Alexander was there and he was starting for him. So that is another name to keep an eye out for, I think, with somebody that could come in and start for you. Like, that's when you talk about this Broncos roster right now, where could somebody come in as a free agent and just start? If they have the credentials, if they are ready to go physically, if they are ready to go in terms of their, they're up to speed on the playbook, I think linebacker is a spot that somebody could reasonably be expected to come in and start, even if they're acquired right now. So those are two guys that I would consider: Shaq Leonard, Quan Alexander, Brian Monet from the Seattle Seahawks, another guy that's missed time due to injury, a true nose tackle. The Broncos don't appear to be interested in bringing back Mike Purcell. They've already given away his number, his jersey number. That belongs now to John Franklin Myers. And I think the Broncos maybe feel pretty good about their defensive line, and they should. Very excited to see what happens with this new group and how they look out at training camp and during the preseason. Very intrigued to see if Ioma Uwazurike is back in the mix this season. But Brian Monet is a big body, 330 plus pounds on the interior defensive line, and somebody who could come in and be a factor for you at the nose tackle position. So it just depends on, with this scheme that Vance Joseph is going to be running, how much do they want that? How much do they need that? Do they need a player who offers that type of skill set? Or are they going more so towards hey, we don't necessarily need a 330-pound player in the middle, on the early downs. We'll see what they do there, but he's a name to watch out for. And of course, Mike Purcell, I guess he could wear a different jersey number. There's nothing wrong with that either. So the Broncos could look to bring him back. Another idea out there is former first-round pick Adoree Jackson, the cornerback and also kickoff return specialist, who has spent majority of his career kind of phasing away from returning kicks and punts, right? That's something that he was able to do exceptionally well when he was at USC, and then early in his NFL career as a first-round pick of the Tennessee Titans. But again, as your role increases defensively, teams aren't going to want you out there taking shots in the return game necessarily. But you know what? Maybe Adoree is sitting there saying like, hey, if nobody's going to hire me to start at corner, I might as well go make an NFL roster, maybe even make a Pro Bowl, maybe make an all-pro team as a return man, because he is very, very good at doing that and consistently has been good at doing that. You look back at his time at USC, that's part of what made him such an intriguing first-round prospect back in the day, was his ability to return kicks and punts. And he carried that into the NFL. He's got over 1,000 return yards. He's got a return touchdown to his name. He's got speed. He's only 28 years old, and he could contribute defensively at an important position. You can never have too many corners. You can never have too many pass rushers, right? So you bring in a guy who can play corner, who has played a lot of corner, who could contribute on special teams in the return game. Like I said earlier with Marvin Mims, maybe you don't want Marvin returning punts this year. Maybe you want him to be involved in the kickoff return game and take some opportunities there, but you really want to have him emphasize offense and wide receiver and playing that role. That's something that I could see the Broncos being interested in. So don't sleep on maybe Adoree Jackson. If the price is right, that would be a fun pickup for the Denver Broncos. And of course, David Shaw, who now has a prominent voice in the front office, he's going to know a lot about Jackson from coaching against him at Stanford in the Pac-12. So I find some options out there for the Broncos right now are fascinating. There's no guarantee that they're going to sign anybody. Of course, these are just ideas. We're in the ideation portion of the offseason, not trying to, throw hot takes out there. But look, free agents are available. The Broncos have a roster with some flexibility right now. When you have the opportunity to carry 90, 91 players in the Broncos case due to the international player exception, when you have the opportunity to carry that many players on your roster, it gives you the opportunity then to get looks at guys. You can get a look at guys in preseason and training camp. Heck, you sign a guy, he plays well, you don't have room for him, you could maybe trade him for something else. So these players deserve opportunities around the league. Will it come in Denver? We don't know, but you know what? We're going to be tracking every step of the way as the Broncos inch closer and closer every day to training camp. Appreciate you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in. Coming up next week, you can expect our training camp previews to kick off as we evaluate the quarterback position. Are the Broncos going to start Bo Nix right away? Does Jarrett Stidham pose a legitimate threat to the first-round pick? Could Zach Wilson actually be a factor? We're going to talk about all that and more coming up next week on Locked On Broncos.